Hello. Our story begins in the barren lands of Lola Sayu. Even Piell was on the ground, holding on to the last few breaths of air he had left. Ahsoka was the first to find the Jedi Master, where he would reveal to her the important data he knew half of the information to. Tarkin had the other half, and because Master Piell knew he had to trust her with this data, he decided in his final moments to make something of value out of this transaction for Ahsoka. He recognized in his final moments of life the capability she possessed. He even grabbed Ahsoka's hand and whispered to her ear, with his dying breath, that she would take his seat on the High Council. This was his final request, the final wish he liked to have completed. Ahsoka was taken aback. She pulled away, looking down at the dying man. She called his name, telling him that she wasn't ready, and he shook his head, to insinuate that he believed otherwise. The abyss of the afterlife took over, and he silently disappeared into the Force, another Jedi casualty of a war having gone on for too long. When Ahsoka's instructors caught up with her, they were all saddened. Even Piell was one of the great Jedi on the High Council, someone that respected everyone, remained friendly with Skywalker, and instructed Obi-Wan through his darkest hours. He was a pirate of a Jedi, someone who cracked jokes, had his fun, and kept his spirits high, even when the war came to the front of the galaxy. He was immediately sorely missed. Ahsoka would not speak of the promise. She would only tell Anakin and Obi-Wan that she had the intel Master Piell shared with Tarkin. Nothing more needed to be said, and they continued their mission. Anakin, due to being her master, knew Ahsoka well. He could tell that the death of Even Piell was weighing on her. They didn't have a moment of silence to talk about it, because the whole mission was at stake. Once they evacuated the planet, though, he took her aside, following her debriefing. Ahsoka had to first share the coordinates and information with other Republic leaders before confiding in her master about what was bothering her. Master Skywalker rightly assumed that Ahsoka was bothered by Piell dying in her arms, which was accurate, though there was more. Ahsoka told Anakin that Master Piell gave her a final request, a final wish or promise that he wanted her to fulfill. Anakin asked if it was a heavy burden, and the 15-year-old Jedi Padawan told her master that it was larger than anything she could have ever conceptualized. He leaned back and looked at her sternly, but offering her the floor to get it out. He told her that he could help her with whatever it was, he promised. She paused and shook her head. There wasn't anything that he could technically do to alter it. Ahsoka told him that Master Piell requested for her to take his seat on the High Council. With the exit of the words from her mouth, the weight of the reality crushed down on her back. She almost choked on the very air she tried to breathe. It was harder to accept than being a wartime leader. Fighting in battles was something she understood and comprehended because it was all she could remember whenever she tried to think about her past. Ahsoka couldn't be a member of the High Council. Just hearing the words come out of her own mouth made them seem unconquerable. Anakin had a similar reaction, but the emotions he felt weren't nearly as burdened, rather confused. Not that Ahsoka wasn't worthy of the honor, but a 15-year-old Jedi Master on the High Council? That was a bit outrageous. Anakin tried to console her, but it was hard to even begin. He was her master. Technically, the two of them were meant to agree on when the trials for knighthood would begin. They were both troubled. Not that they thought even Piell had negative intentions, but it was baffling to say the least. As they tried speaking through their emotions, firstly, and why this choice was made, secondly, a theory came up. Perhaps Master Piell believed that the Council needed a youthful voice, someone that might challenge them more than anyone else. They added that Ahsoka wasn't handpicked by them. The Council likely would choose someone else they trusted, someone who might agree with them more in the absence of even Piell. Anakin then, in trying to lift Ahsoka's spirits, explained that even Piell saw her as the perfect person to fit that role. That didn't really alleviate her concerns at all, but she appreciated the attempt. Yet, her master brought up an important point. Aside from her turmoil and the immense pressure, she was going to be an important voice. She offered something that no one else did. She connected with the youth of the Jedi Order. She was not one of the elders. She wasn't very much like Kenobi in relation to Jedi guidelines anyways, so this could be an opportunity above anything else to make a difference. She didn't know how she could confront the members of the council as a peer, but she hoped that they would value her opinion as they would anyone else's. Luckily for Ahsoka and Anakin, they were with Plo Koon's fleet, being that he happened to be the one that picked them off of Lala Sayum. She, after her short interaction with Anakin, decided to speak to the counselor who knew, even for a much longer time. Their conversation was quite short and to the point. Plo was not disappointed with the last wish from his dear friend. In a way, as he explained to Ahsoka, it was a bit of a play for Even. He saw what everyone on the council was seeing. The writing on the wall was clear, but no one wanted to say it. The Jedi Council didn't have the strength to address what was clearly the core problem for the Order and even the Republic. Even chose her because, unlike someone the Council would handpick for their ranks following his death, she would speak her mind. The Counselors would respect her as a master and as a counselor, even if they didn't agree with the decision to appoint her. Ahsoka's voice could move mountains because she might be the only one of age to suggest something that might change the trajectory of the Jedi Order. She needed a lot of political lessons just to understand the relationship between the Order and the Republic, but just by sitting in on sessions and accompanying them through various discussions with the Chancellor, she'd fit right in. Plo made a point to tell her that this was not a burden, but a high honor, not just for herself, but for Anakin too. They would likely make an arrangement to make sure she could continue to train despite becoming a master so early into life. She then asked what else that meant for her, and Plo chuckled. She made a new record. Satele Shan was formerly the youngest Jedi Master ever. Vernestra Rwoh became a Jedi Knight at her age too, 15. Plo patted her shoulder and told Ahsoka that she was among highly respected, honored, and adored Jedi heroes. Now it was her turn to stand amongst them. Perhaps that's what even Piell saw in her, the steadfast presence of leadership from Master Shan, and the undeterred, kind-hearted brilliance of Master Vernestra. The return to Coruscant had the first assembly of Masters in the High Council since even Piell's death. The session started with the ceremony to congratulate Anakin on becoming a Jedi Master, a high honor indeed. He was overjoyed to become that, and while part of him felt like he was left out, he couldn't be upset. It was Ahsoka. Sure, he too wanted to be a counselor at one point, but he trusted the intentions of even Piell, more than that of most of the other counselors. He accepted his new honor as a Jedi Master, stood by Ahsoka as she got hers, and then he left as she readied for her first session. Anakin, of course, would remain at the bottom of the tower, pacing impatiently until she finished up. Master Yoda welcomed Ahsoka into their ranks as the youngest counselor in Order history. He called it a great honor to have her in their ranks, and everyone else gave their congratulations to her, before immediately turning to the first point of business. Ahsoka just listened and tried to keep up. No one said anything else to her directly. The excitement and adrenaline surrounding the whole process quickly disappeared as the reality of it sat in. Not to say that Ahsoka was super excited, but she had continuous butterflies until they started talking about movement in the mid-rim and pushing for final siege lines in the outer rim. There were some quick notions and discussions about the politics of the Republic, as Adi Gallia listed off some potential moves to expect from the Palpatine administration in the next few days to week. It was so much to digest for Tano, but she kept up as best as possible. For a first session, she didn't really say anything, mirroring Master Plo Koon until the session concluded, and Mace asked to speak with Ahsoka alone. Once everyone left the chamber, she agreed. So Anakin, downstairs, had to watch all the counselors file out of the elevator as one by one, as Ahsoka remained to be the last one behind. The two Jedi Masters didn't move from their seating, and instead, Mace told Ahsoka a story. She came from a very strong lineage, one where several Jedi had the opportunity to join the ranks of the High Council. Yoda, Dooku, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan were all offered seats or joined. Of course, Master Skywalker wasn't on the council because it wasn't in Piell's last words. But there was a point to this. Dooku and Qui-Gon were both outside-the-box thinkers, people that the Jedi Council tried to bring into their ranks for diverse opinions. While Dooku rejected the offer, his closest friend, Sifo-Dyas, did not. He became a member, and he came with a lot of baggage. Sifo-Dyas made his mistakes. People suffered for those mistakes, but he was a good friend and a good person. Mace continued, even iterating points made by Plo the previous day about the Council avoiding a challenging voice due to the war. Comfort may have been safe, but it wasn't what they needed, and even Piell knew that. This move was very similar to Tyvoka's move that added Plo Koon to their ranks. The Master of the Order came to his conclusion with this. He told Ahsoka to not lose her voice. She was one of them, and they all accepted that. She was here by the will of the Force, and they would want to hear her thoughts as they came. Though it should be said, hence the reference to Sifo-Dyas, that it is also very easy to get swept up into the power of all of it. Sifo-Dyas was well into his life by the time he joined, and he made countless mistakes. Ahsoka would make mistakes, that was without question, but don't let the position go to her head. He also meant that in two different ways. Don't let it get to her head in the egotistical way as Sifo-Dyas had, and don't let the grandeur of the position take her out of it. Pressure came with the role, but she had defeated pressure before. She'd overcome obstacles, and her own master thought very highly of her. Even if this wasn't the direction she was ready for yet, fate rarely calls upon one at a moment of their choosing. He smiled and patted her shoulder, suggesting that she should get going. He was sure Skywalker was waiting for her downstairs. The next full week of interaction with the High Council had Ahsoka struggling to get a grip on the whole process. She kept up, but she frequently used a datapad to track information inside the discussions. Ahsoka was bound for the front lines in the coming few days, so she had to be ready to balance war and conference. The counselors warned her to keep an eye on the datapad, because while she might only be using data points for notes and not full-blown strategies, it could potentially be deciphered by separatists. She was mature enough to understand that though, so she used it as a moment to scoff at the council and even push back a little. Ahsoka wasn't playing hardball yet by any means, but she was getting comfortable with interacting with them in such close proximity. She really only knew Plo and Obi-Wan the most. She and Yoda obviously connected enough for him to assign her to Skywalker, but everyone else was different. Being the youth amongst a council that had a combined age of well over 1,000 years was difficult. She listened to their plans and added nothing yet, though this coming campaign with Master Skywalker would be everything she needed. Anakin, on the other hand, thrived as an official Jedi Master. He and Ahsoka didn't interact much during the previous week because of everything she had to do with the Council and some political, religious, and societal lessons with Windu, Plo, and Kenobi. Now, she had a chance of getting back into the flow of fighting with her real master and joining the boys of the 501st. During her battles with Skywalker by her side, she reclaimed her presence. She was Commander Tano, not the underdog Jedi Councilor. All of her men respected her, and while the Councilors did, she undermined herself by sitting inside of her own head rather than the actual chamber she was in. The High Council wanted her opinion and her thoughts, but she shared none of them because she truly thought she was incapable of relating due to her youth. Ahsoka wasn't one of the elder Jedi with decades of experience. She didn't even have 2 decades. But that's why the miniature campaign mattered. Not only did Anakin remind her, but the clones and her time on the battlefront gave her a chance to see what she was capable of again. When she felt things, she thrived. Whenever she got stuck in her head, she lost concentration and started doubting herself. She had some hologram meetings with the Council and spoke to Anakin about pretty much everything. He refused to tell her how to operate though. Anakin had his disagreements with the operations of the Council, but he didn't force his personal thoughts onto Ahsoka. He didn't want her to feel as if she was being pressured by him to act in any which way. Instead, he encouraged her to think for herself, and challenged them whenever she felt they had something worth going after. The first month and a half of Ahsoka's time on the High Council didn't change much. Master Skywalker, on the other hand, had a grand time being a Jedi Master. He'd frequently go into the restricted section of the archives to investigate and rent out holocrons for personal study. These weren't really Force-related powers, but lightsaber skills. Anakin was eating through information rapidly, and he loved it. There was a certain freedom he felt by being an official Jedi Master. Sure, those freedoms pretty much existed prior to their ascension to the actual rank, but it felt like he could get away with a lot more because he had a title. Skywalker was given the option to instruct other Jedi. He rejected. He believed full-heartedly that he was still instructing Ahsoka, which was actually the truth. Anakin didn't want to make Ahsoka feel like she was being abandoned. Of course, she never would come to that conclusion, but he wanted to be present for her, as her master. Ahsoka was grateful for this, and Anakin remained in the background, evolving rapidly throughout her entire time on the Council. The aforementioned month and a half also had Ahsoka visiting the Chancellor for the first time. As Ahsoka learned more about the High Council, the politics they played during the Clone War, and historically, she started to see something. None of the counselors caught on to it because of their position as Jedi generals, but Ahsoka, without having to focus on two completely different fronts, thanks to Anakin being the general, she realized that the Jedi were being played. Historically speaking, based on Plo's, Mace's, and Obi-Wan's lessons, the Jedi had a habit of supporting the Chancellor. During the old and golden years of the Republic, they weren't serving the Senate without loyalty from the body of government. Nowadays, though, they were blindly hoping that a corrupt Republic might throw them a bone once in a while. Through discussions with Palpatine, she saw the Chancellor demand excellence from them in his own sly way. They abided because they needed support from the Chancellor and the Republic. This cycle was not the same as it had traditionally been. With the Sith Empire and the Nile, there had been mutual success based on mutual trust. The failures of the early war were not just because of this fracture in unity, so she wasn't trying to say that. More or less, her question for the Council was this: if they were loyal to a government that did not respect them, and they won, then where did they stand in the era of peace that followed? This line of questioning brought up a fair reality to the Jedi to question themselves. They were remaining loyal to the Republic, in service to them, and sacrificing their lives for what? The Jedi obviously weren't being baited by the concept of reward. However, they did recognize something based on Ahsoka's question. They were constantly losing funding from the Senate, facing external reviews, and frequently being positioned on propaganda as warmongers on both sides. They were the Jedi Order, defenders of peace and justice, and the droid armies were disrupting that. What Ahsoka did was exactly what her lineage had done over the past several decades though, challenge the Jedi Council and what they thought they knew. The Order was blacklisted as the enemy, and they took it, because serving the people while remaining in favor of the Republic was more important. Ahsoka was outraged by this. How could they allow themselves to be seen in such a light? Palpatine walked all over them and they barely tried to hold their own and never did so anyways. Her question lingered in the air. The Jedi never joined the war in hope for some sort of thanks from the galaxy. However, they shouldn't just openly accept that they were going to be mistreated for simply providing. They all needed to play hardball. Ahsoka even raised her voice ever so slightly to say she would go to the Chancellor and demand fairness. If they were going to serve the Republic, then the Republic should be more than willing to serve them. She suggested a separation, and in turn, a reliance on the local Republic systems with loyalty to the Republic. If the Jedi didn't want to abandon the war, then she would understand. But imagine a scenario where the Jedi could rely on hundreds of star systems, while earn the trust of thousands more over time. Palpatine was not on their side, even if he was Republic aligned, so why not try something new? Look at Senators Amidala, Organa, Mothma, or Chuchi. They all owed their lives to the Jedi, and respected the Order greatly. Look at Cham Syndulla and Satine Kryze. These people knew who the Jedi were, and if these governments could chip in a little extra, the Jedi might even come out on top. Ahsoka understood the funding needed to function as an organization, but that funding didn't need to come directly from the Chancellor. They were being mistreated. She hadn't seen it because she knew no other path, but now she understood it. It was time for them to make their voices heard, recognized, and most importantly, respected. This line of thought is exactly why even Piell wanted Ahsoka inside the Council. Not that he had any reason to assume that she would suggest this, but rather that she would bring a new perspective and offer something the other elders could not. To say the Council was taken aback would be an understatement, but they started to run through the list of options they had. Another bill was being proposed by the Chancellor that was meant to limit their budget once again. The Jedi did nothing but support the government, and here came their chance to separate. However, the name Jedi would also remain synonymous with the sect the CIS and Republic propaganda was targeting. So they might become more financially stable, but their outreach wouldn't be changed, perhaps even hindered more. Ahsoka believed it could all be earned back. If they needed to, then they could perhaps try and change their name quote-unquote officially, so that they could be identified from a neutral standpoint. Regardless, it was worth a shot. Everyone on the council, including herself, had a close contact inside the Senate. They didn't need to continue suffering for nothing. The council, while initially slow to fully grasp the concept, actually liked it a lot. This wasn't like Sifo Dyas, Dooku, or even Qui-Gon, all of whom might have suggested an all-out divorce from the Republic. Rather, Ahsoka gave them a chance to remain the same, to maintain their relationships, but expand naturally, as the Republic tried to break them down. A vote came, and almost unanimously, it was agreed upon. The Jedi were going to fight fire with fire, and once the session ended, they quickly got into communication with their allies. Ahsoka had a discussion with Padme and Anakin over a supper at her apartment. Master Tano didn't want to make the Chancellor look like the bad guy, but she had to be honest with her instructor too. Palpatine was hurting the Jedi intentionally, and if not that, then ignorantly. Padme had her own concerns for the Jedi because of these budget cuts. She did though express her pride in Ahsoka for making a choice and bringing up a point of contention with a collection of elders. That took guts, but standing up for what was right held far more importance than just letting it pass her by. She didn't buckle when the odds were against her. She should be proud of that. Despite the political challenge, the battlefront still called to Masters Tano and Skywalker, so they left Coruscant once again. All the different senators and representatives that the Jedi reached out to got into contact with their local governments, and an assortment of processes were started. Importantly for Ahsoka, she and Anakin continued their training and development. With Skywalker thriving thanks to assistance from holocrons in the restricted section, Ahsoka grew too. Their training with one another only progressed faster. Not that they weren't already soaring as a duo, but some of the holocrons offered different perspectives, ironically. They required the rank of Master because the Jedi worried about immature individuals attempting to gain certain powers through the use of the dark side, which, yes, some of what Anakin was learning came with using the dark side too. Ahsoka accidentally also did, and they basically perfected what they were trying to learn in each holocron because of that. But this was a controlled iteration of darkness, not exactly as advanced or mastered as Windu's Vapad, but close enough in that same range. The Council continued their deliberations. They made arrangements and deals with various governments around the galaxy. Bail Organa led the charge, thanks to his wife being the literal queen of Alderaan. With such a prominent core world pushing to support the Jedi Order individually, other systems quickly fell in line. The crazy part about Alderaan is that it received government bonuses from the Republic for taking on millions of refugees during the war. Alderaan was already prosperous, so in accordance with the Jedi needing help, Queen Breha and her government promised to match the price the Republic was paying. The promise was that the Jedi would focus on humanitarian relief more than the war. It was a shocking promise from Alderaan, but its leadership and citizens loved the Jedi Order. They never forgot about the Sith Empire attacking their home world thousands of years ago, and then the liberation led by Satele Shan. The Jedi were considered extended family. After Alderaan's contribution came a massive sum of credits from Mandalore, then Chandrila, Naboo, Toydaria, Eridu, and even the Bothans. It was a collective movement to assist the Jedi Order so that they could protect a wider base of people. Mandalore's inclusion in this, though, created an immediate problem. Because Mandalore was neutral territory, it made them a potential target for the CIS because they were helping the Jedi. Palpatine told the Order that they could either reject that payment and hope that Mandalore wouldn't be affected, or separate themselves from the Republic. Well, ironically, the Jedi went for a third option, one proposed by Ahsoka before funding even came in. The Order would change their name to protect themselves and those who donated. No longer officially the Jedi Order, and now the Bashidto, named after an old code the Order used to follow. Under this new name, the Jedi were no longer required to meet requirements from the Galactic Republic. They weren't even subservient to them anymore. That didn't stop the Jedi from serving alongside clone troopers though. It sent the government into a tailspin of fury, because they needed a scapegoat, and the religious monks that fought a war for them were that. They struggled to get any movement inside the Rotunda though. Senators from across the Senate mostly wanted that money that they were giving to the Jedi back, and now they no longer had to provide it because the Jedi were getting it elsewhere. Palpatine was furious. Some of his biggest allies cared because he did. But overall, the Senate received more budget spending for the next cycle because they weren't paying the Jedi, and people were happy. It was a win-win for everyone in their eyes except for the Sith Lord. The perfect result. The Jedi could continue to help in the war, while remaining almost entirely independent. Not a terrible deal at all either, and the Jedi were quite happy with it too. As a Bashidto Order, the Jedi continued to serve with the clones in advisor-like roles, helping on strategy and using the term self-defense very loosely. With the extra funding and support from various neutral systems, some Jedi were paired up with leadership under threat, specifically Satine. This new Bashidto sect could also help out separatist worlds because all the laws created for the Jedi during the war were for the quote-unquote Jedi, not the Bashidto. The law said Jedi in the name. The Bashidto were technically not that anymore, so they could freely move around the galaxy as a neutral entity. The Chancellor searched for ways to undermine the Jedi, but it continued to blow up in his face. The Senate really didn't care about the Order anymore. The only reason they ever agreed on budget cuts or external reviews on the Jedi was the money. The Senate was greedy, and by removing that greed from their hands, none of them had any agenda against the Jedi. Maybe, yeah, one or two did because of patriotic duties, but not half of the entire Senate population. Hell, even some of the representatives that disliked the Jedi had their planetary government supporting them, because it was beneficial for everyone involved. The Order not only removed its political identity, but created a bubble of protection for itself from systems that agreed to help. Though it should be said that even with the Jedi overwhelmingly pleased about having a far larger budget, there was a problem. Some of these systems were hoping to bribe the Jedi into becoming a protective service, treating them like they had a private army. The Bashidto Order didn't fall into these traps, but it was hard. Alderaan, Chandrila, Naboo, and Mandalore were spending credits because they had credits to give. Other systems like Scipio wanted protection for the banking clans. The Bashidto did not take bribes though. Ahsoka's outside-the-box thinking led to Kit Fisto suggesting that the Jedi make all the transactions public information. Not only would people know what systems were giving to the Jedi, but where all of their credits were being spent. As the transition from Jedi to Bashidto transpired, they also changed their logo from an older iteration. It was meant to separate themselves from the corruption of the Republic and their failures to break it before it got too far. Over the next several months, the war heated up and became far more explosive. Anakin transformed into a true Jedi, but Palpatine's voice still lurked in his mind. It was a much more aggressive assault from the Sith Lord. Instead of just forcing interactions to happen by pulling Anakin away from deadly battles, he literally would plant himself inside of Skywalker's mind. The death of Jedi friends, loved ones, and instructors filled his dreams. The Republic became irrelevant inside the Council chambers though, and when Anakin spoke to Ahsoka about his visions, she went to the Council. Thanks to Barriss Offee changing her plans to bomb the hangar bay, tension inside the Order never really came. She decided to place her energy in relief efforts, without Master Luminara by her side. Barriss, like many other young Jedi, thrived as the Bashidto sect took on a less warlike approach to the conflict in the galaxy. But her decision to not bomb the temple gave Masters Plo Koon and Depa Billaba a chance to take Anakin away from the capital to focus on a deep meditation to break out of these forced visions and nightmares. The Jedi didn't assume these visions were plants, but because Anakin told Ahsoka exactly what these dreams were about, instead of layering it behind the guise of attachment avoidant, Depa and Plo were able to focus on the root problem. Anakin's communication with Ahsoka was much clearer than it would have been with Yoda. So while Ahsoka didn't go out of her way to tell these counselors exactly what Anakin was feeling or seeing, she was able to communicate it more efficiently because she wanted Anakin to get the best help as possible. It came without mentioning specific people, but also how unnatural their deaths seemed. These weren't war-related conflicts, like Anakin would have insinuated they were in a conversation with Yoda. Instead, Ahsoka suggested that these deaths were forced by predetermined circumstances that did not relate to the actions these individuals were facing, i.e., targeted attacks or assassinations. Depa and Plo volunteered to set out and root these problems during a meditative journey with Anakin. Yet in their absence, Sidious was hopeful to turn the government against the Jedi Order. For the past few months, he'd been preaching inside the Senate the idea of making the Bashidto out into being a separatist ally. Essentially, he wanted to legally turn them into rivals of the Republic because they supported CIS planets that were suffering. As a note, the Separatist Parliament vetoed anything Dooku tried to do to make this happen on their end. There were a few senators who bought it because they feared the Jedi collaborating with the Separatists, but it really didn't go anywhere. The thing is, the Jedi still helped the clones on the battlefield. The Separatists weren't exactly thrilled about it, especially in government, but the Jedi were only destroying battle droids, and they didn't really ever commit to invasions or campaigns, just defenses, which wasn't a big deal either. So the CIS couldn't really be super unhappy about it. Also, these Bashidto warriors were doing humanitarian relief elsewhere in the galaxy. They went from public enemy number 1 to none. No one really cared what they did because planetary money never really affected the Senate budget. Most of the systems donating to the Jedi were using throwaway funds that would have been used to create monuments or something else lavish. It was better spent on a force designed for good, one that they could track doing good. Palpatine, in all of his anger, believed only one course of action could be acted on, and he, in the middle of the evening, issued out Order 66 to the entire clone army. He waited patiently for this moment. Finally, after all of this internal frustration with the Jedi, it could be done. And then, his eyes turned towards the Jedi Temple, only for nothing to come. He didn't understand, and neither did the clones. Order 66 affected them because it turned them into Jedi hunting machines. But there were no Jedi, only the Bashidto. So, because the Jedi changed their Order name, they were no longer quote-unquote Jedi officers or generals. Order 66 therefore meant nothing. The clones just got an order and wondered what the purpose for such an action would have on them. Palpatine picked a time where Skywalker would be away from the temple, and yet nothing really changed. The Jedi were fine. The Order traveled around and the clones acted a little different, but not a single death would come from the activation of Order 66, because Bashidto advisors were not Jedi. The Jedi Order never caught on either. Despite some of them seeing a hooded man order the execution of some Order 66, they couldn't figure out who was behind it. Some of the Jedi reported it to the Council, but they all assumed it was just Dooku trying to break through communication relays. It clearly failed, so why would they be concerned except for security breaches? Sidious was beyond disappointed though. He couldn't believe it. Order 66 did nothing, and it brought him no satisfaction and no victory. Despite this, the return of Maul was still imminent, and Adi Gallia would unfortunately be killed by his brother Savage, though this would leave another open seat on the Bashidto Council, one that would be given to Anakin. The growing youth on the council may have been concerned for the likes of Ki-Adi-Mundi, but they were a very healthy addition. Also, insanely stacked lineage inside the same body of the council, with Yoda, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka all as members of the same council. His addition didn't change a whole lot, aside from him learning about what Palpatine was trying to do to undermine the Bashidto sect. Anakin couldn't believe it, but he also turned a blind eye to it, hoping that if he ignored it, Palpatine would magically stop trying to hurt the Jedi and turn them in on themselves. But the Sith had themselves a larger problem to worry about. Several clones reported the Order 66 incident, believing it to be a problem in security. Quietly, the Senate would create a committee to investigate it, led by Amidala. They called it the Wartime Solutions Panel, basically allocating former Jedi funds to themselves to hire an investigation to start a deep dive search into the Order 66 ordeal. It would take months to come to a total conclusion, but over that time, while Palpatine was still trying to fix the war to favor himself, which was going terribly, and also trying to turn Skywalker against the Bashidto, Senate investigators started connecting dots. Order 66 was executed around the middle of the second year of the war, giving these investigators plenty of time to find the culprit, while Palpatine was still trying to make himself Emperor, get rid of the Jedi, and make the war seem unwinnable. The conclusion was shocking, but it led to a thorough examination by the panel, and eventually, the slow betrayal of Palpatine from inside the Senate. The irony in the end would be that Order 66, designed to destroy the Jedi, would unravel the great Sith plan. While the Bashidto wouldn't really ever know about this, the end of the Sith came with a final stand, similar to an Alamo type of engagement. Grievous, Dooku, Sidious, and a couple of other battle droids holding down a fort inside of Castle Sereno. The Senate would dispatch thousands of clones to take out Sidious, and they would ferry to the planet, while a space battle raged in the atmosphere. First, the battle droids would die off, with Grievous and Dooku sequentially after. Sidious would stand his ground in the fight, with the very clones he commissioned. A final stand, one that would, for Sidious, end in defeat. He and his allies may have taken the lives of well over a couple thousand clones during the siege, but it still did not result in a Sith victory. The Bashidto never found out. The Senate would cover it up, in an effort to maintain Palpatine's image as a public servant. The war naturally was already turning towards a Republic victory. The Jedi stayed out of the way, and there was no reason for them to involve themselves in the apparent sickness that killed the Chancellor, or the final battles of the war. The clones were leading constant offensives, which the Jedi had no stake in because they only defended territory. Thanks to their positions on the Council, Anakin and Ahsoka accompanied Obi-Wan to Mandalore in a fight that would consume Maul and his brother. The system that led the Neutral Systems Coalition would survive, and Death Watch would crumble. Without the support given to the Jedi by Mandalore, this assault by the pirate faction would have probably succeeded. The neutral Bashidto, though, were the perfect cure to the pirate threat. While the Clone War would continue on far longer than it would have with Sidious, turning into a 5-year-long drawn-out conflict, it would end in victory. The Republic coming out on top after defeating the Confederacy came with an assortment of problems, but with a powerful neutral coalition standing in the way of total galactic dominance, the Republic actually had to focus on their citizens. The Jedi did everything they could to fill the middle ground with protection and assistance for citizens of every faction, yet they were needed to be advisors in the discussions between the Republic, Coalition, and Confederacy. The CIS crumbled in on itself, and the Coalition was strong behind leaders like Satine. Eventually, deals would come, peace arranged, and the Jedi would come out on top as heroes of the end of the conflict. Their position in humanitarian relief saw them as who and what they were truly meant to be. Ahsoka's position on the Council started that. Now with her master by her side on that same council, the two of them would be able to trailblaze the Jedi Order into a new future. One with rapid change that positively impacted not just the lives of those around the galaxy, but the souls that called the Jedi Temple home. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So this story, I really thought it'd be interesting to create a scenario where Ahsoka became a master before Anakin. And the only way that's really possible is like if a dying wish is done. Again, like I said in the story, Tyvoka did that with Plo Koon, that's how Plo ended up on the Council, and Qui-Gon did that with Anakin, hence him being trained by Obi-Wan. I really thought it'd be interesting, and I also loved that like Anakin didn't take it personally. I think Ahsoka's like the only person he wouldn't be drastically offended by kind of overtaking him. I think he'd be upset in some ways, but I also think he would see the value of being a Jedi Master, because he, by Ahsoka becoming a Master, would technically be required to become a Jedi Master. You can't have a knight training a Master, so, you know, that's kind of why he instantly becomes a Master. I liked this idea of having the Jedi Order rely on outside force, like, you know, taking money from Alderaan's government, which is super prosperous, or Chandrila or whatnot, instead of going directly from the official government. It adds more of a benefit for the planet supporting it, but it does come with the risk of bribe. which is why I added that in there. But I really like the idea of that being more of a, it's like the collective people are donating to the Jedi, and it's like, it's not like one of those scummy, scammy kind of donation centers. It's like you can actually see where their credits are going, and the Jedi are very transparent with that, and I really like that direction for the Jedi Order. As for getting rid of the Sith, I kind of like the idea of the Senate doing an investigation themselves, and that investigation resulting in the Sith being discovered, but the Jedi don't have anything to do with it. And I think that kind of thematically coincides with their pull away from war, and while they are very loosely defending Republic territory, very loosely, fighting in the war, I think it does relate to them that they are not directly involved in the final battle, and it makes it even more ironic that 2 of the 3 people responsible for the clone army are killed off by the clones. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.